Welcome to Let's Talk Portsmouth, a new communications enterprise developed by the City of Portsmouth's Marketing and Communications Division. If you're interested in Portsmouth news and information, public concerns, and other relevant topics that could impact your life, Let's Talk Portsmouth is the podcast for you. We'll talk city business, including interviews with city administrators, hold discussions with civic and community organizations, and converse with newsmakers from around the state on topics close to home and heart. Now, here's your host, Sharon Hoggart.
Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. We're so excited to be with you today. Let's face it, we're excited to be with you any day. Welcome to Let's Talk Portsmouth, the podcast that's all about local government, community, and headlines in the news. I'm your host, Sharon Hoggart from Marketing and Communications. As January exits, we plan for the annual observance of Black History Month. With us today, we have two professors from Norfolk State University, behold, who will talk a little history and a little politics. But first, these messages. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I think it's just vapor.
Vaping is safer than smoking, isn't it?
One vape pod has as much nicotine as one pack of cigarettes. Get your head out of the cloud. Talk to your kid about vaping. Visit talkaboutvaping.org. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and the Ad Council.
Okay, let's get started now. Let's see. You're listening to Let's Talk Portsmouth, and as we usually do, we like our guests to warm up their vocal cords and talk to us a little bit before we start the interview. So having worked with these two guests for a decade, or a little more than a decade, I suspect that we're all going to go back to the classroom, at least for the next few minutes. Welcome to Let's Talk Portsmouth, Dr. Khadijah Miller, Professor of Interdisciplinary Studies, and Dr. Carol Pretlow, Professor of Political Science at Norfolk State University. Professors, welcome to Let's Talk Portsmouth. Dr. Miller, we're starting with...
Thank you.
You are very welcome. So we want to start off with our customary icebreaker. Dr. Miller, we'll start with you. So tell us a little bit about your background, education, and professional experience, and explain to our listeners exactly what interdisciplinary studies is.
Well, thank you again for having me. So I am a professor. I'm a professor of interdisciplinary studies, and I currently serve as the interim dean of the Robert C. Nussbaum Honors College at Norfolk State University. My background is in African American studies and women's studies with a particular focus on Black women's U.S. history, 20th century. And I am an interdisciplinarian. All of my degrees are interdisciplinary degrees, and interdisciplinary studies as a discipline recognizes that to truly address and solve the complex issues in our society, that we need to integrate disciplinary knowledge. And so therefore, it is a discipline that allows for critical and creative and courageous thinking to pull from the various disciplines to address those complex issues that we face in our world today. As a degree, it allows students to have two or more concentration areas that they integrate in a meaningful way to address whatever their future plans are. And so interdisciplinary studies is really a groundbreaking and exciting degree program, and I'm really excited to be a part of that program at Norfolk State University.
All righty. Dr. Pretlow, you have a law degree and teach political science. So tell us about your background, both academic and professional.
Wow. How long do you have? I tell everybody when I'm introducing myself that I'm a country girl. I grew up in Smithfield, Virginia, on a farm that my dad inherited from his dad. And if you want to talk about the experiences moving from slavery into contemporary society, I'm your girl, because by growing up on a farm, I saw the impact of
the post-World War II situation, the 1960s, and of course today. But more to the point, I'm a graduate of Fisk University with a BA in political science. I'm a proud graduate of Norfolk State University with MAs in mass communications and urban administration. And my law degree came from American University with a JD and the Masters of Law in international law. Now, more to the point, when I heard Khadijah talking, I was thinking that's exactly what I tell people in political science. You can't understand the political climate and the impact of politics and law if you don't understand history, economics, sociology, and the whole 9 yards. So even though my focus is on political science, and I teach American government and constitutional law and intro to law, I make the point that all of these disciplines are necessary to understand law. And that leads us into critical race theory, of course, which how can you do history without doing what happened to the African American, what happened to us as African Americans?
All right, Pretlow, you're getting ahead of the game there, but
okay, I'm sorry.
I worked with you all those years. I did not realize you were a graduate of Norfolk State too, so that's something that we have in common. But anyway, okay. Khadijah, we'll start with you. Tell our audience about the founding of Black History Month and a little about the evolution of the celebration.
Well, Black History Month was founded by the Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1926, and Dr. Woodson is the founder, along with about 4 others, and they formed the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. But now it's the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH. And so when it was founded in 1926, Douglas first started with Negro History Week. Mm-hmm. And it was a week to highlight the achievements that African Americans at the time were involved in. It was an opportunity to pause and reflect on where they have come from, where they are, and where they hope to go. And then soon thereafter, the week expanded to the entire month of February. And many realized, I would say, in the almost 100 years, this is 22, so we're 90 some odd years of observing Black History Month, it provides an opportunity not just to reflect on the past and where we've come from, but it provides an opportunity for us to reflect on where we're going and what we can do and to address very current issues. And so although we call it Black History Month, history, there really is a focus on cultural, social, political, artistic, all the gamut of the contributions and experiences and the richness and diversity of African American life and culture in the United States and abroad.
Mm-hmm. Pretlow, you want to weigh in on that question too?
Well, Khadijah did such a great job. I have very little to add except to add to what I said previously. When you think of history, you think of a composite experience, not a separating out into little tiny pieces. It's a composite experience with the recognition that all of these pieces contribute to the whole. And so I can't teach politics without understanding my history. And all of it, when you think about it in contemporary applications, you're thinking of the political environment, which of course includes social and economic issues and practices and implications. So it all comes together.
Mm-hmm. And this goes out to anybody that wants to respond. Exactly who was Carter G. Woodson? And he's considered the father of Black history, correct?
Yes, he is. I'll jump in. He is considered the father of Black history, and rightfully so. he was among the first. He received his, doctorate from Harvard University, and he was instrumental in acknowledging and sharing. He even participated in the 1912-13 Republican convention and did an exhibit on Black history. And so he has been extremely vocal in providing information, establishing the background, to provide information on the Black community. And it's because of his insight and really being ahead of his time to recognize how important this week would be in the lives of African Americans in the United States and abroad.
Mm-hmm. People in the Black community used to joke that February was chosen for Black History Month because it was the shortest month of the year. But that's not the case at all. It was chosen for a specific reason, was it not? Anybody?
Oh, okay. I'm hesitating because I'm still becoming aware of why Black History Month is in February. But when you look at our history and you look at the political environment in the 1800s and in the 1900s, you see significant events that occurred in the Black community during that time and in the nation. And so when you look back, say, at February and you look at the Lincoln administration, you see that some of the decisions that were made that had direct impact on us occurred in February. So even though I don't have concrete proof, I'm assuming that that is part of the reason why February is so significant for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to add, and that is so true, Carol, that, initially, Woodson chose February in terms of tradition and also reform, as Carol said, with some of the legislation and what was passed in February. And it's also associated with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass, which is February 14th, and of Abraham Lincoln. And although, and it was because Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but we know, and Woodson knew, that Lincoln did not free the slaves, right? It was the Union Army. It was those Black folks who worked and persisted and fought for their freedom. But because of his action, because he did sign the bill, then we know that it played a role in the history of African Americans. And so, that's the general cause for choosing February, but also to recognize the contributions of those Black people and culminating in this month of February.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Okay, this question is for both of you, and Carol, we'll start with you. In the 21st century, we're in 2022, what does the Black History Month observance mean? Is it still relevant? And Khadijah, we want to get your take on this too.
Well, it's very relevant because you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. And it's, to borrow from Khadijah's department, it's definitely interdisciplinary. So, for example, this past week, when we looked at the swearing in of our new governor, I sat there and I said to myself as I'm looking in my TV screen, how does this not remind me of the 50s and 60s? And so when I look at the transition into Black History Month and what it means a continual motivation to keep on going, to keep on pushing, and to not say, oh, poor me, what has happened to me? Let me hit the ground running and see what I can do from now. And that means Black History Month continues into the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Khadijah, you want to add something?
The only thing I agree with everything. I just want to add that Black History Month is needed. I think if we look at the current political, social climate in the United States and even abroad, that we need this time for a strategic and intentional pause to recognize the vitality and necessity of African Americans in this country. The contributions of African Americans extend beyond the United States. We have high influence, we have economic influence, we have definitely cultural influence, and it provides an opportunity for us to remember that African Americans are full-fledged, 100% Americans and impactful in this country, historically, presently, and in the future to come.
And Khadijah, you may have already answered my next question. This comes up. This comes up a lot of time in the discussion. That's okay. That comes up. This question comes up a lot of times in the media, and so I'm going to throw it out to you, academicians, you academics. Briefly explain, well, not so briefly explain, how Black history is American history. How does that work?
Well, to me, when you think of American history, you think of it almost like a rainbow, that it is not just a separation of races and cultures. It's each individual race and culture and what they contributed to the progress and development of the United States. And so when I look at the varying presidencies and the varying achievements, I'm looking at all of the components of it. So you can't say separate out one part and say eliminate the other part, because history is a kaleidoscope. It's a lot of dimensions and a lot of contributions. And I'll say one more thing. If anybody would feel that they are not included in this, I feel very strongly about Native American people. And I have 2 students in my class who are Native American, and I was like, how must they feel for us to constantly talk about other races and other contributions and not talk about them?
That's a thought, Carol. Khadijah?
I would say Black history is American history, and I would even say that American history needs to be Black history. And, you know, here at Norfolk State, when we teach U.S. history, it includes the history and experiences of all of the various peoples. It's so interesting to me because, you know, America is built on immigrants, right? And so the immigrants who came by choice, and then if you want to be, you know, technical, immigrants who did not come by choice, who were forced to come, but we're all immigrants. So, you know, for anyone who has a rightful history would definitely be African Americans, and as Carol said, definitely natives who were here before everyone else. And so the you know, it speaks to this push to usurp the diverse experiences and the accuracy of history. And so we have to include all persons in this country who really have made it what it is today.
Now, I'm going to let y'all have a run of the show after this question. Tell them I had to cut you off. But anyway, what is all the controversy over teaching of critical race theory? As I understand it, it's not even taught in public K through 12 grades. But in the news, it paints a different picture. You might get critical race theory if you take a law class in college. So what is the controversy about?
And Shauna, I'm glad you asked that, because I'm still trying to figure out why this is such a complex, controversial issue. History means that you're looking at every single aspect of history, not the stuff that you like and you don't like, because frankly, when I look at the war, the Cold War, there's a whole lot about that I didn't like. But you're looking at the things, yes, some of it is uncomfortable. Some of it is embarrassing. But that doesn't mean it's not part of the history. Now, in law school, yes, I took critical race theory. Now, the only difference is that in law school, you are taught you don't make a decision about something until you see every part of the perspective. And so that is what critical race theory is. It's not saying you're good and I'm bad, but it's looking at every single element so that you have a complete picture. So I don't know what the big deal is.
Okay.
That's well put, Carol. And the only thing I would add is that critical race theory is a theory. And what do theories do? Theories help us to make sense, right? They help to explain situations. And so if we think about it, this is a critical explanation of the role that race as a social construct has played in our society. What is controversial about that? And part of the debate is this gross misunderstanding of what it is. The topic, critical race theory, serves as a method or a way to understand what the role of things like housing segregation, criminal justice policies, the legacy of enslavement on Black Americans. Critical race theory helps us to understand the whole issue with policing. Why? What is the background? Why are Black men feared by the police? Why are they seen as a threat? It helps us to try to understand what are the social and historical and cultural aspects of our society that we have these particular challenges. And when you think about it, we engage in a type of critical gender theory when we look at the impact on women. When we say, why are women discriminated against? We have a sort of critical LGBTQ+ theory when we look at the discrimination that all of these different groups experience. And so I think it goes back to this idea of America has to own up to what it did. America was founded on racist, sexist, elitist concepts and a foundation, and it's being disturbed right now. And so that it is uncomfortable. But the only way to grow and move forward is to have those uncomfortable conversations, admit the wrong, and move forward. The United States is the only country that has never done a formal apology for enslavement. Every other country, before the pandemic, I was in Amsterdam, and they have a memorial to apologize for the role that the Dutch played in the transatlantic slave. All these other countries have made such statements. The United States needs to admit what it has done, and then it can move forward, and we could stop having these types of irrational conversations over critical race theory.
Do y'all want me to book y'all a speaking tour across the country? I think I can do that real easily. That's the easiest and best explanation I've heard. I've heard all this other stuff.
Me too.
And so thank you for that. Y'all did a good job on that. I'm going to start booking y'all a tour across country. Okay. So, what is Norfolk State University doing this year to celebrate Black History Month? Any nationally recognized speakers, exhibits, lectures? Are you doing anything special in your classes?
Yes. Well, let me say this. So our tag here is Black History Month is every day at Norfolk State. And so we are kicking off the month with Tamika Mallory. Tamika Mallory is an activist. She worked with the National Action Network with Al Sharpton, and she is extremely active in advocating for the rights of all persons for fairness, equality, and justice. So we're really excited to have a conversation with her on February 2nd on our campus in person. We are a vaccinated and masked indoors campus. And so we're really excited to have her. The theme for Black History Month is Black Health and Wellness. And so we are offering every Wednesday, we're calling Wellness Wednesday, and we're discussing, having conversations, cultural, historical wellness, financial wellness, mental health wellness as well. We are also working on some other speakers that I can't discuss at this time, but please go to our website, www.nscu.edu, to see a full listing of our programs and plannings. And I'll even share that for us, we do Black History Month in February, March, and April, the entire spring semester. So, look for programming throughout the coming months.
Mm-hmm. Carol, you want to weigh in?
Well, I'll weigh in and say I'm so happy that Khadijah has taken this initiative and gone on, and that she has a supportive political science department. In fact, in my classes, I have scheduled in times that we will engage in the programs and participate. But equally importantly is I try to get my students to look at their own selves and say, what contribution am I going to make? So once a month, I continue my discussion on Fridays in my constitutional law class and intro to jurisprudence. Tell me something I don't know. It's from Chris Matthews' show way back a few years ago. And to look into yourself and tell me something I don't know about your family, about your circumstances, about how we can improve this and that. And it has really helped me to get a better understanding of some of the issues. And one short note is, in progress, we're working on improving voter registration for students and getting students more actively involved in the political atmosphere. And that's because of Dr. Elsie Barnes and Dr. Jerry Hunt, who have both stepped up the plate, even though they have retired, and said, we're going to do this, we're going to work with students, and we're going to move Norfolk State forward in terms of voter registration and engagement.
Okay. Khadijah, you talked about the theme for 2022, and I was going to ask you about that, so you covered that. But the 2020 theme was interesting, I thought, for Black History Month. It was African Americans and the vote. Why in the world are we still talking about voting rights in 2022? That's in the news.
Well,
go ahead. You go first.
No.
Carol's a lawyer. You go first, Carol.
No, because we see how gerrymandering and redesigning voting districts is having an adverse effect on us voting and participating. And so even when you look at our representatives in Congress and the past few days and this discussion of the filibuster, we're seeing that if we don't step up the agenda and get more actively involved in voting, in registering people to vote, in making sure they have access to the polls, and that includes transportation to the polls, because as long as we just have certain districts in which people can vote, we are having an adverse impact on the African American community, some of whom don't have transportation to get to the polls. So we have a lot to do.
Okay. Khadijah?
I agree with that. And I tell my students, I said, this is 2022. The Voting Rights Act was 1965. It is just shy over 50 years. So, voting, the fight for the vote has been from the beginning of the United States. And the United States is 200 and some odd, 300, almost 300 years old. And the voting is only a fourth of that or less. And so, unfortunately, we're still discussing it because it has not become a part of the fabric of our government and constitutional practices. And so we have to continue until it is a true 100% part of how our government functions. And we know the power of the vote. That's why we have all of these illegal practices to thwart and to disrupt the voting, particularly of people of color.
Okay, I'm going to go to take a quick break so y'all can get a drink of water. We're going to have another commercial message, so stand by.
She can stand, she can do more. Get chic and STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
All righty then. And that commercial reminded me of my next question, which is, when today's parents talk to their children about Black History Month, what should they tell them?
Wow.
Well, I'll tell them. I'm a parent. I have two daughters, one in high school and one in college. And, ever since they were young, I tell them that Black History Month is an opportunity for, if no other time, it's an opportunity for you to see yourself in media and social media. It's a time to remember the great history that you are a part of, and to build their confidence and to revel in the great achievements of African Americans, and to go beyond the typical popular persons, not to take anything away from Dr. Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks or Malcolm X or the greats, the many popular greats, but also to talk about those unsung heroes like Joanne Robinson, who was really the organizer of the Montgomery bus boycott that occurred. Unsung, heroes to talk about Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was a journalist and an activist, and, who had a hard life but ended up really just surpassing and played a role in the founding of the NAACP, and the National Association of Colored Women's clubs. And so, there's so many, and to use this as an opportunity perhaps to uncover and learn, to read a book, to watch a movie, that our history is so rich and vast that there is something for everyone that they can grab a hold to and really be encouraged as a Black person in the United States today.
Well, I think, Khadijah, you're quite right, and I missed the point that I have children too. I have about 200 of them, and I consider Norfolk State students my children. And I usually begin my class asking them about their families and all, and then I say, and I have about 200 children, and they look at me, and I say, yeah, you my child, because from day one, when I realized I wasn't going to have children, I realized, not biologically, but that these were my children, and I tell them, I said, even when I fuss with you, don't your real parents fuss with you sometimes? It's because I love you. It's because I see you, and you are my children. So with that said, I agree with Khadijah, and I also want them to celebrate everyday people in our community, some that they don't even think of as role models. I see them when I'm walking through the malls, and some people are custodians, some are business people, some are just the very fabric of our life is more diverse than it was when I was a child in terms of work and careers and engagement. So this is a special time for all of us.
Khadijah, you brought up something when you talked about the old standbys, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and many teachers today still roll out the old standard presentations. So in your opinion, both you and Carol, who are the Black history makers over the last two decades, the history makers that will be talked about in the future?
Wow. There are, it's interesting because there are still so many firsts that we are experiencing. We recently Sidney Poitier passed, and people talk about his first and what he did as an actor, but also the diligence in which he worked to represent on screen. And so I would say over the last 2 decades, we still have so many firsts. And I think about, Ruth Carter with her work in costume design as a fashion designer, and Andre Leon Talley, who just passed, and his work in fashion. Of course, Michelle Obama and Barack Obama. I believe that they represent so much, and we lean on Oprah Winfrey. I think there's so many artists, there's so many scientists that their names go unannounced, but we feel the work that they have done. I'm drawing a blank, but there is the African American female scientist who worked on the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yep.
And there's so many. They're the unsung teachers, right? The teachers who are persisting and educating our students right now. And so I would. There's just so many names for me to think of, but I think if we just go through using social media and the role that social media has played in bringing us together to recognize, I would say to look at the number of African American entrepreneurs in the last 20 years. Let's say even in the hair care industry and in the makeup industry, we have these Black-owned companies, and I just think it's wonderful that we have of increased visibility, of such products, and to reach out and touch these various persons. And I would say I was thinking about these popular like Black handbags, like Telfar and Brandon Blackwood. That we have. These are the heroes that we have today in every area of our society.
And I don't want our audience to think that we are being flippant, but one of the positives with this pandemic has been it has showcased Black scientists, doctors, and researchers. I mean, I've seen YouTube stars go from YouTube to Good Morning America and to Today's Show. So that has been one positive thing that's come out of that. And I know you ladies are strapped for time, so I'm going to push this ahead so I can get you out of here on time. Oh, no, I know what I want to talk to you about. The 1619 Project has come up as being controversial. Some negative things have come up about that. So let's talk briefly a little bit about that before I have to let you go. What is the 1619 Project, and what part did Norfolk State University have in this project?
Well, the 1619 Project speaks to the first documented Africans to come to the United States, and in particular in Jamestown, Virginia. And so Norfolk State University participated. We hosted a multi-day conference in 2019 on our campus, and we had in various speakers to talk about the experiences of those first Africans, to also talk about to take the time to recognize from the beginning the active participation of freed as well as enslaved Africans in the United States. And in particular, in our area, we know that Virginia participated extensively in the slave trade. Also, Virginia participated extensively in the Underground Railroad, and also that the Africans and African Americans in this area actively participated in the rebellion against and resistance to the enslavement of Africans and African Americans. And so, Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander worked tirelessly to have Norfolk State actively participate in the programming, and created some documents, to go back, and so that students and everyone can read more about 1619. Also, Dr. Kalita Fairfax was a member of the commission in Hampton, and I believe Dr. Newby-Alexander was a member of the statewide commission. And so they actively participated in bringing more information to light with the 1619 project, supporting the work of Nicole Hannah-Jones, and even beyond that.
Carol, you want to add anything to that?
No, Khadijah did a perfect job and added information that I didn't even know. But I do want to say that each and every person in our community has a part to play in the projects, whether it is informing your own family, talking to students in your family, or just having casual conversations. I get teased because I'm sitting here now at Barnes & Noble Cafe in the mall, where it's my usual place, but I have conversations like the one we are engaging in just with people sitting here. So every single person can make a contribution if it's just a conversation and making someone else aware. And don't think that because a person disagrees with you that it has to be
Disagreeable?
disagreeable. I'm feeling for a word, disagreeable. It can be you disagree with them and you still have a good conversation. And I add this as a slight example. I have, there was a gentleman in my home, in my condo, that I disagreed with about just about everything. And one day I was getting ready to come to Norfolk State, headed to Lloyd Rail, and he said, "Oh, let me give you a ride." And I said, "Oh no, because I don't want my body to be discovered somewhere." And he said, "Pretlow, stop that." And he said that he really didn't understand how deeply hurtful it felt sometimes to hear racist comments. I said, "Now we talk about it intellectually, but do you think about how that person that you have had an intellectual debate with might go home and cry? I am that person that nobody thinks of me as crying because you rarely see it, but I do." And I said, you have to realize that those conversations have an impact, but maybe they also contribute to growth, because he and I now laugh, and he says he didn't realize how as an individual it hurt. He saw maybe as a group, but he didn't realize the impact individually. So,
Carol, thank you. And please promise me that you will go home soon. It's supposed to snow. Go home.
Oh my God.
Okay, guys, we're getting ready to wrap up. I'm going to go to one more commercial break, my last commercial break, and then I'm come back and ask you for some resources. And then we will wrap up this episode so I can get you out of here on time. Stand by.
Since 1845, men and women of Portsmouth have stood up for the safety and well-being of their city as police officers. With nearly 20 different units, the Portsmouth Police Department provides a variety of services, including crime prevention and investigation, school resource officers, patrol units, active robbery and homicide units, and a homeless outreach team. If you know someone who would like to join our team as a Portsmouth police officer, contact our recruiter at 757-393-8020, extension 5655. Again, that number is 757-393-8020, extension 5655. Or check out our website at portsmouthpd.us. Take your first step to becoming a Portsmouth police officer today.
All right, this has been a fantastic conversation. And just in case we piqued someone's interest, I want you guys to tell us and tell the listening audience, if you want to learn more about the history of African Americans in America, what are some of the best books or other resources? Hey, Carol, don't go in that suitcase you got in the back room with all them books in there. Because I know you.
Well, I'll go first by, Carol. She lives in Barnes & Noble, so she'll probably give you about 150 books. But I think what is key, there's a slew of textbooks. I think you could start with the 1619 Project by Hannah Nicole Smith. I think you could look at Jones. You could look at Ibram Kendi and Keisha Blaine did a book, 400 Souls, which it provides a community history of African Americans. I think you could look at, if you want to know more about the Black women, you could look at A Black Woman's History of the United States by Berry and Nicole Gross. Darlene Clark Hine has a slew of books that do a nice job to try to encapsulate African American history. Of Shining Hope, a Thread. I would say look at the resources of Henry Louis Gates. He does a lot of public history. I would also, there are growing numbers of books that speak to young people. There are graphic novels that try to capture that as well. And so I would do a Google search and just, throw in Black history, African American history, and there's just so many. And it's such a broad topic that there's really no one book. If you want to know about, let's say, like the incarceration system and that the whole impact, you can look at Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. She talks about that. So depending on what your interest is, there is a book or 5 that you can grab and learn more about.
All right, Carol, talk about your favorites so we can wrap up.
Oh, wow, that's hard to say. And one of them is by Samuel L. Jackson, and I don't think I'm allowed to say one of those words.
No, you can't say
It's Bad Mother, the F word, the life and movies of the coolest man in Hollywood. And because why this is a favorite is because movies are a reflection of our culture. And even for a person who might not like to read, they might have been to the movie and seen it. And now if you read the book, you get some of the insights as to why this movie was so important. So that's a favorite of mine. And Jamie Foxx, I'm going outside of the traditional literary tradition and doing some things that I might not have done otherwise. Jamie Foxx, act like you got some sense. And when I thought about this book and picked it up, it was because that was a favorite phrase of my mom's whenever she was disgusted with me. Will you act like you got some sense? So that is one. And of course, I think it's never too late to go back in time and look at the writings of Martin Luther King, look at Maya Angelou. Just read.
And D.L.
perhaps the last by Tabitha Brown, Feeding the Soul, that allows you to understand your pain, but let's get beyond that.
And I would suggest D.L. Hughley's book, what is it, Dear White People?
Oh, yes.
It uses comedy and some history, and it's kind of a cool book.
Yeah.
All right, guys. You've been listening to Let's Talk Portsmouth, the podcast. Thank you, Drs. Khadijah Miller and Carol Pretlow from Norfolk State University for joining us on this issue of the podcast. All right, this is your chance now. Do you have any wrap-up, any last thoughts for our audience?
Wow. I would just like to say first, thank you for the opportunity to share. And I would just encourage everyone to remember that Black History Month, Black history in general, is American history. It's everyone's history. And there's so much to it, and we should be proud and revel in the richness of that history, and to remember that history is fluid. And so what we do today becomes the history of tomorrow.
Okay. Carol?
Wow. I don't think I could say it better. I think that you should think, too, that each and every day you are making history. Even when you say, oh, my God, I hate going to this job. I don't want. Hello. Hit the ground running. You're making history.
And keep it moving. That's right.
Keep it moving.
Right. Thanks, guys. We sincerely hope you've learned something new from this interview. Visit podbean.com for this episode and other issues of Let's Talk Portsmouth. And listen and download our podcast wherever you listen to your quality podcasts. Robert Heinlein once said, "A generation which ignores history has no past and no future." Stay cool, be safe. We're out of here.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Portsmouth. the podcast that's about the city of Portsmouth and our connections around the globe. Listen and download our next episode for more news you can use and information that may just change your perspective. Find our podcast where you find quality podcasts, the Podbean app, Spotify, and Amazon Music Audible. Until next time, take care.